Um, so the agenda has been presented for the meeting, and I just want to say a couple of words, just 1 minute. Why are we looking at this? We're in the middle of a crisis, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there's a desperate need for interventions of various kinds. Right now, according to clinicaltrials.gov, there are 2,000 odd trials around the world testing a drug or vaccine, 21 in South Asia, that is India, Pakistan, and I think Bangladesh. According to the Indian registry, there are 275 COVID-related studies. Many of them are for Ayurvedic medication or other non-allopathic interventions. There are 200 vaccine candidates around the world, okay, and 15 clinical trials. So the question I have to ask you is, or the question that is going to be discussed here, what are the concerns about the ethics of such research, about the types of trials being conducted, about the specialized research techniques being used, for example, vaccines, and about the hurdles that are involved in getting affordable access to proven treatments. So that is what the webinar is about. So the first speaker is Dr. SP Kalantri, whom I will now take the liberty of calling SP. SP has decades of experience as a senior physician, as well as a senior researcher, okay? And he's been a vocal critic of unscientific practices, and everybody here who's been on Twitter knows that he's had very strong views about the kind of research that's going on right now. And SP will speak about the randomized clinical trial, randomized control trial, and why it must be used in a pandemic, even in a pandemic. What are the ethical requirements to do a randomized clinical trial? And I'll just throw this open right now, SP, with the question is, should Favipiravir have been approved for use in COVID-19 patients? Over to you, SP.
Please unmute yourself, Dr. SP.
So good morning, everyone. So on 30th Jan, the first COVID case was reported in India. So it indeed was a black swan. And over just 5 months, if today's numbers are anything to go by, we have seen at least 500,000 Indians infected with COVID virus, and we have recorded close to 16,000 deaths till now. So the virus was unknown. At least at the onset, there were no effective drugs. There was no vaccine in offing. And therefore, the entire world, India included, was frozen with fear. People started pressing panic buttons, and the public, the providers, the physicians, the policymakers, the government, at least to begin with, had no idea how do we contain this pandemic. So naturally, because the virus was unknown, the people started desperately trying for some antiviral drugs, drugs which could reduce inflammation, drugs which could reduce the death rates, and the researchers became very active almost all over the world. Now, if we take India, we find, and today I searched the CTRI website and found that there are 275 clinical studies going on in India right now. Of them, 39 have been classified as randomized control trials, and 3/4 of them come from alternative and complementary medicine. So everybody seems to be busy now doing some kind of a research on COVID. Now, these are observational studies, these are randomized control trials, these are case series, these are drugs on Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, modern medicine, almost everything. And over the next couple of minutes, I will take you through what are the ethical challenges of conducting research when the pandemic is on. If you look at drugs, well, the hydroxychloroquine created a lot of hype and hope for almost 4 months before it became a dead horse. And several other antiviral drugs like remdesivir were also tried partly successfully. Dexamethasone created a huge success story after its success in a recovery trial. But what is most interesting and what is a bit alarming and amusing is the alternative and complementary medicine also entering the field. And over the last couple of days, we found both stories of Ayurveda drugs as well as an oral drug called Favipiravir, both being very aggressively marketed in press conferences, in social media, and whatever happened, at least as far as these two drugs was concerned, was just not science. So what is our priority? If we put ourselves into the shoes of a common man who just got infected with COVID virus, naturally his first priority would be to figure out whether effective drugs are available. They not only want effective drugs, but they also want drugs which are quite safe. In other words, we need to have drugs which have proven benefits, which need to have drugs which have a very favorable side effect profile, and we need to have drugs which could be applied and could be used in real world setting as well. So when our hunt for this kind of a drugs begins, we start looking at study designs. And here I would show you the hierarchy of evidence. Usually, if we look at the common clinical practice, our practice is often dictated and driven by ideas, opinions, personal whims, fancies, idiosyncrasies, our own biases that we carry in our OPDs and wards. And then we find that we report some quote unquote interesting cases. Then we build up a long series of cases. We do some retrospective case control observational trials. We pick up a group of individuals and follow them up over a certain period. But the best evidence would come from randomized control trials. So your individual opinions, case reports, case series, case control trials, and observational trials, they've got huge limitations. But if you really want to figure out whether the drugs are really effective and safe, well, you have got no other options but to opt for a randomized control trial. You might as well ask me that why not simple descriptive studies? Why not pick up a group of individuals, administer them a drug, follow them up, and figure out whether it worked or it didn't work? The huge problem with these descriptive studies is that, well, there is no comparison group. So we really don't know whether the association between the intervention and the outcome was caused by the drug, whether the drug was really helping these individuals or it was certainly harming them as well. With the result that at the end of the day, the conclusions of these studies are not very clinically meaningful and they are unlikely to impact our clinical practice. My point is that if you do such scientifically invalid studies, which we cannot apply to our day-to-day population and which create a lot of confusion instead of solving the problems that they are aimed at, is it even ethical to look at these studies? Is it even ethical to recruit people in these descriptive studies? And isn't it a waste of time, energy, resources, and efforts trying to sample this group of individuals and creating some conclusions which might not make a little sense there? So what do we need? So we need studies which generate data which we can trust. We need studies which generate data and which give us an impression that, well, at the end of the day, if we read these studies, well, we have got very clear and robust evidence about their potential benefits as well as their risks. So you also need that these studies should be adequately powered, that they should enroll enough number of individuals, and they should have very clearly defined clinical endpoints. The most important clinical endpoint, purely from the perspective of a common man, would be death or life, isn't it? Or they would like to have a fewer days they would be spending in the hospital. They will not be like get intubated or mechanically ventilated. But instead, we often find that in observation studies, we often end up getting such surrogate points as the decrease in temperature or a decrease in viral load or those shadows disappearing from the X-rays, which though might look good and might look very tempting, but please do remember that they are only surrogate endpoints and they are not clinically meaningful endpoints. So what we need is an RCT, and the RCTs are very simple to design. All that you do is that you have a good look at the study population, apply inclusion and exclusion criteria to the individuals, and then you randomly assign them into a current treatment or a new treatment. Now, this current treatment could be your current standard of care. This could be a placebo. This could be a drug A. This could be an intervention B. And you test it with a novel untested drug, which you think in the heart of your heart probably might work. And then you follow these two groups over the next few days, weeks, months, or a year and count the events. How many die? How many survive? How many are intubated and ventilated? How many escape the punishment of intubation and ventilation? What is the average length of stay in the hospital? You count those events. And then at the end of the day, you say that, well, all things being equal, people who got drug A did better than drug B, and you also express the magnitude of benefit as well. So what are the advantages of doing RCT? The RCT has two major advantages. The huge advantage is that it minimizes bias. Because it's a randomization, every participant enrolled in this trial has an equal opportunity of being assigned to either an experimental group or to the current standard of care, which means we can say that all things being equal, people who are assigned to an experimental group did better or fared worse compared to a comparison. We are very clear about that. The second important thing is that there is a blinding, which means that the investigators, the patients, and as well as assessors do not know who got what. And because this takes away their biases inherent in their minds, again, this is a huge advantage of a randomized control trial. And thirdly, and very importantly, unlike observational studies, RCTs also very clearly tell us that if there were differences between the two groups in terms of a mortality, for example, whether this differences occurred because of the strategic effect of a drug or an intervention, or the difference between the two groups was purely by chance. So little or no bias, beautiful blinding and masking, and taking away that chance as a cause and effect relationship, make randomized controlled trials as great trials for assessing both effectivity as well as safety of the drugs there. The question one might ask here is that when it is ethical to randomize, if we very clearly know that drug A is definitely better than drug B, well, we don't need an RCT. But we need RCT when there is an uncertainty in our mind or there's a clinical equipoise. For example, let us take an hydroxychloroquine. When people started doing clinical trials on hydroxychloroquine, they were not sure whether people who are put on hydroxychloroquine would do better or probably suffer from the side effects of hydroxychloroquine. And therefore, the trials on hydroxychloroquine were very ethical. The same would hold true for dexamethasone. And we know that when the people of COVID-19 now get into the second week, they suffer what is called a cytokine storm. They are intensely inflamed. And the assumption is that if we could calm down that inflammation by corticosteroids, we shall be sending more patients at home. We do not know whether those steroids would help or those steroids would hurt. Again, there's an uncertainty as well as clinical equipoise, the perfect case for a randomized control trial. The question which often, the question which people ask as well as policymakers ask is that right now it's a public health emergency. The COVID is raging all over. The people are frozen with fear, isn't it? The front line workers, healthcare workers are finding it extremely difficult to even offer a basic care to the patients in the ICU. Given this scenario, is it possible to conduct a randomized control trial in the midst of a public health emergency? And my answer is yes. If you look at these very prominent journals, the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, and JAMA, we find at least half a dozen beautifully designed, beautifully powered, very meaningful studies with clinically meaningful endpoints published, in which clearly told us what works and what doesn't work. For example, we got to know for the first time on the basis of recovery trial and solidarity trial that hydroxychloroquine has no place in critically ill hospitalized patients in their ICUs. We also got to know that remdesivir definitely reduces the length of stay in the ICU, but does not meaningfully impact the mortality. We also got to know that this combination of lopinavir and ritonavir doesn't help patients who are admitted to the hospital. So these trials, when they were done, when the epidemic was on and it was almost at its peak, not only they were able to do this RCTs very successfully, but they were also able to tell the entire world what helps or what doesn't help. And therefore, the answer to the question that can we do an RCT? The answer is resounding yes. Having said that, the second question would be that is it ethical to conduct an RCT in the midst of public health emergency? And people often refer to the Ebola outbreak in 2014, which had hit the three of the most poorest countries in the world, where close to 28,000 individuals were infected, about 12,000 individuals died, and people often draw a parallel between the Ebola outbreak and a COVID pandemic. My point is that Ebola is a classical example of a missed opportunity. Had we done very adequate, well-powered randomized controlled trials during Ebola outbreak, some RCTs indeed were done, then we could have known what works and what doesn't work. Let us not lose that opportunity when the COVID pandemic is on, and it is our ethical obligation and a moral imperative that when the outbreak is really on, let us not lose this opportunity and let us use this time as much as we can to make sure that we get to know the drugs which benefit and we weed out those drugs which definitely are harming the individuals. So what if these RCTs were not performed? Well, let me take you to the hydroxychloroquine story, isn't it? For almost 4 months, isn't it? Almost everyone in this country, right from patients, their grandmothers, uncles, and aunties were obsessed with hydroxychloroquine. But for the beautiful data generated by Solidarity trial and an NEJM trial, isn't it? We have now put a final stop on hydroxychloroquine. At least we now know that hydroxychloroquine does not work in hospitalized patients. We also know that dexamethasone works beautifully. It is able to cut down the mortality by 1/3. So there are great benefits of these RCTs. Another problem with this, if these RCTs were not done, would have been that, well, the current standard of care based purely on our whims and fancies would have become a standard of care. And the standard of care would have been carried out for years to come there. And that would have created a huge problems so far as the virus is concerned. Lastly, I'm as a physician, and this is a dilemma which I deal almost day in and day out. What is my role? Who am I? Am I a physician? Am I a healer? Or am I an investigator? Who am I answerable to? My role is to help current patients with whatever is possible. My role is to save their lives. Or if I put the hat of an investigator and a researcher, is my role to learn as much as possible about the potential interventions in order to help current and future patients. And this is a dilemma which physicians, which healthcare workers will have to deal with. But now let me tell you that both these roles are very easy. So my role is that I must provide clinical care as well as conduct a clinical research. They are not mutually exclusive. And both roles can easily be done, provided one has got a passion, one has got an intuition, one has an energy to work both as a physician as well as a researcher there. Thank you.
Okay, shall I go?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, SP. You set the context of the discussion, and you argued why treatments must be based on the highest level of evidence. You also dealt with my follow-up questions, but what to do? SP, you have also said the Ebola outbreak was a lost opportunity. Well, Amar is part of the ethics review board, I think, during the Ebola outbreak. And there was an urgent need for vaccine.
Dr. SP, can you please mute yourself? Sorry. Dr. SP, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Yes. Go on, Sandhya.
That's okay. Well, SP made a comment that the Ebola outbreak was a lost opportunity to do RCTs. Now, Amar is going to be speaking on vaccines, but Amar is also part of the MSF Ethics Review Board, if I'm correct. Am I right, Amar? So, it'd be
Yes.
good if you respond to, if you can comment on SP's comment about it being a lost opportunity, and if that could then move into your discussion, which would be on the ethics of vaccine research and specifically to do with one particular technique of research. So go ahead, Amar. Amar, you can go ahead.
Hello, you are able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, no. What about now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think SP has laid a very good ground. So let me start with what SP said and what Sandhya asked, that what happened in Ebola in West Africa. I think what he was saying is true, that there was massive scare. People were panicked, and anything could have been possible, as it is happening now. I mean, you can see that when we are talking about the development of new drug for treatment, we are hardly talking about the people on whom these new drugs are being tried out, in the repurposed drugs and all kind of things. Normally in ethics discussion, the first thing that we discuss is not science, but the participants and what happens to them, right? And here we are talking more about science rather than talking about the participants, that all those things are being done on those people. And are they really being provided best standard of care, which is where we are not using antiviral, but without antiviral, to do good clinical care of everybody who is coming in the hospital. That was, I think, one of the reasons why in Ebola, the mortality rate range was very high, 30% to 70 or 80%. Why? Because some centers had a very good standard of care, the basic care of taking care of the patient who is in a critical condition. So I think that is also very, very important, whether in all these trials which are going on all around, there was a basic standard. They could not do RCT at the time, not because they did not want to do it, but because people were opposed to it. People wanted the medicine, any medicine they wanted to consume. Simply, they said, well, we are not going to be ready to be sitting as in the control arm where there is a placebo. Whatever is the experimental medicine we should get, and there was a lot of violence against the health workers. So context also decides what kind of trial will be possible and what kind of trial will not be possible. So when we come to CHIM, that is a controlled human infection model for vaccine, same thing will be there. I mean, this is the CHIM which were very controversial and not everybody ready to participate. All of a sudden, you will find that the large number of people ready to participate, and there is a big popular support to doing something like this. So what you have as a vaccine as different from the therapeutic medicine, and why vaccine trials are so sensitive, for the society, because throughout, I mean, we are using healthy volunteers because vaccine is given to healthy people. I'm talking about preventive vaccine, not the therapeutic vaccine. Therapeutic drugs are given to the patients, and so it is only related to those patients, and the risk-benefit ratio that you work out is based on patients suffering from a disease and the patient having a problem with the new drug that is being tested. While here, health volunteers are completely healthy. And there's a high incidence of infection, and that's how people are really alarmed and they want something there. And there is the involvement of vulnerable strata. Normally children, in COVID vaccine, you must remember, the children are not the real target of the vaccine. People like me, who are above 60, they are the target. This is where they are the most vulnerable people, right? And the COVID vaccine has to be, useful for the entire range of the age group. So if you do a trial only on the children and say, oh, my vaccine is working, but if it doesn't work, and if it is not providing similar kind of protection to the older people or above 40, above 50, then again, you will have to discuss whether it is really going to be a useful vaccine. So there is going to be an issue related to what kind of vulnerable people who will be used and how useful it would be for those vulnerable people. There is the issue of stigmatization. All of you know about it. I'm not going to talk about it. There's another area is that vaccine, many companies get involved and it is discussed a lot simply because once a successful vaccine comes, the company becomes the richest company in the world. At least in this kind of pandemic where billion people or several billion people will be getting that vaccine. So your market is captive, and state is going to pay for it. So you have somebody who has already decided that they will be giving you money, and many of the state government have already invested money in the vaccine trial. So there is a mad rush for the vaccine because of that. There are, Sandhya gave the latest number saying that around 20 vaccine trials are going on. But there are more than 100 vaccines among them are still at preclinical way. There are about a dozen or 1.5 dozen trials which are being done in the human being. Phase 1, phase 2 trials are over for some of the vaccines. The forefronts are UK, US, and China. And because there is so much of demand to have something, they are even talking about doing trial of mRNA vaccine, which is a a dream vaccine, but at the same time, it is one of the most problematic vaccine, where you are not giving a person any kind of variant of the DNA of the virus, but you are giving mRNA, which is going to trigger production of DNA and protein of the organism in such a manner that the body starts producing antibodies against it. Now, the problem is that if that trigger that you send as a vaccine, if it doesn't stop producing it, or it does get, transform into more virulent one, what happens? These are the things which have never been tried. Although in customized care in cancer, some of such things have come up and it seems to have worked. So there may be this kind of vaccine also coming up. So let us now go to CHIM, because controlled human infection, why it is it is being talked about in the context of the vaccine. So what is it? It is very simple. You infect a person and then try to test a new therapy or a new vaccine on that. It is also called human challenge. When you infect a person, you are challenging the person with the organism. This is a brief history, very long history. Many of you must be knowing about Edward Jenner and some smallpox, where a gardener's son was given, he was infected first, and then once the immunity developed, he was also given smallpox. Nazi experiment also used it. Guatemala syphilis experiment that you know about, where the sex workers, the soldiers, and many different kind of people were infected by John Cutler to find out what happens to the syphilis, right? In Tuskegee trial, nobody was deliberately infected, but in this Guatemala experiment, there was a deliberate infection, which ultimately led to the American president apologizing to the Guatemala, but never giving any compensation for what they did there in 1946-48. This kind of trials were also done in prison earlier. It was only in 1970s, that is the area where the experiments come down to the academic institutions and well-known researchers get involved in it. And so what we are talking about now is not few individuals on their own intuition doing this kind of experiments that Edward Jenner did, but a systematic way of doing this research and creating a control environment to ensure that the people who participate, they do not get hurt. So this is a new wave that has come from 1970s, and large number of trials have taken place in the developed countries. Particularly infectious diseases are not so common in developed countries, and they keep traveling to the developing country. So they needed different kind of remedies, and for which they kept doing this kind of studies. But are they relevant for the underdeveloped countries? And that's how LMIC has also recently, in last 10 years, undertaken several trials. So far, some 155 such controlled trials have taken place. And you see the kind of diseases for which it has been done. Malaria is the topmost, but there are many other, including dengue. One trial has been done, including TB, hookworm and all kind of stuff, you will find. Now, how does this scheme take place? It takes place in two different stages. The first stage is to challenge a person with an organism and find out the pathophysiology of what happens to the body. So you completely watch the person, monitor the person, and ensure that the clinical infection that happens and what kind of body reaction is coming about. You do that, and then in the next batch of volunteers, you provide a vaccine first and then infect them and see whether the vaccine is working or not. If you are doing it for the treatment, then you infect them first and then give the treatment and say whether the treatment works or not. So this is the two different kind of stages of the CHIM, because the kind of organism you use is a made in the laboratory or change in the laboratory. You have to do the first stage, otherwise you cannot go into the second stage and cannot find out whether it works or not. Again, here it is also control trial. So you have a control group as well as those who are getting this kind of stuff. You have to ensure that the organism that you are using doesn't escape into in the environment or go and infect other people or infect the researchers. So you require all kind of control mechanism to see that it is done as per the requirement, not more than that. So what is an ideal CHIM? So you have an infective pathogen which is of public health significance. Animal models are unlikely to be useful. This is both are true for the COVID. There is an absence of persistent infection and post-infection long-term sequelae. We don't know anything about that as far as the COVID is concerned. So that is one major stumbling block that, against the CHIM is going to remain. The challenge organism well characterized and manufactured under GMP, good manufacturing that. So that is another problem. That is it well characterized, or it is having so many strains and other kind of stuff that we are not able to actually pinpoint. So that is again issue of science. And model uses the similar route of infection and spectrum of disease as the natural infection, so that when it is taken for the vaccine is taken outside for the people, it works there. What kind of pathogen? It should be well characterized. You normally try to attenuate it, weaken it, so that it does not really harm the person on whom it is being given. Now, COVID pathogen is still not under as much control of the researchers. Now they are developing vaccines, so they might have developed some control over it. So I don't know, but if they are able to come out with a variant of it, and if it works on the CHIM, and then will it work in the other people? That remains a big issue. It should be highly sensitive to treatment, and this one is not sensitive to treatment. We don't have a treatment at all. Stable and not susceptible to mutation. Again, we don't know about, because there can say that there are several strains available, and there are different genomes of that are being talked about. Some are very more lethal than the others, so we don't know exactly where we are there. Those required for successful challenge should be known. It is well known that if there is a less dose of virus you have taken in your respiration, then the disease is less as compared to the high dose, and there should be predictable illness pattern. Again, this is still under investigation, because it seems it is not affecting only your lung, that is pneumonia, but it is also creating much wider damage to different body organs like kidney, liver, and many others. And now we are talking about it also developing diabetes. So there is a still we are learning about the illness pattern of this new organism. So it should be done in access to a state-of-art healthcare, clinical laboratory facilities, and monitoring. Everything should be great. That is what is talked about. Isolation should be so good that it does not infect anybody, and environmental protection is very important. Biosafety issues and all kind of stuff is there. So these are the advantages of it, that you can do very quick trials, and you come out with vaccine much faster than otherwise. There are lesser number of participants required. There you will be required, tens of thousands. You may require very few, and then perhaps one field trial which may require a few 2,000, 3,000 people. So that's a lesser cost involved. And if CHIM is conducted in the right areas where there is a need, it may be very useful. Limitation is that it's an intentional human infection, so you are potentially harming somebody. But that kind of harm is done all the time in the clinical trial. Phase 1 clinical trial is also done on the healthy people, and to find out the toxicity. So there is some harm that is caused there. You have BAB trial, bioavailability, equivalence trial. So you'll have to look at to what extent it is permissible. But most important thing is that the kind of organism that you are using, if there is no treatment, will that harm be very problematic as compared to organism like, say, typhoid organism, where the treatment very well. It may not be generalizable, because natural way and the wild infection may be very different. So there is another technical problem that you are going to have. And coming to the issues, two things very quickly. When I was reading on this subject, what surprised me the most was that There are not the scientists who have been demanding that CHIM should be done as early as possible. What I found was that there were a lot of people in the field of bioethics and the general population, which has been demanding that do it now. This is extraordinary condition, and we can do any kind of trial in order to get the remedy. This is a kind of stuff. There is also a voluntary organization, onedaysuno.org. They have also started enrolling volunteers for participation in clinical trials. By now, they have already enrolled 30,000 people who said, yeah, we are ready to undergo it, and from 140 countries. The key argument is that the participants are ready, willingly giving consent to take risks or say, ready to make sacrifice for the humanity. There is an assumed popular support to such research. So should we be doing it now? That is, I think, the issue that we need to take up. So let us take one. The high social value of the CHIM is possible if the coordinated efforts are there. If CHIM is a standalone model, it will not work because of all the limitations that we are talking about. Now, who is going to coordinate so many stakeholders? Today, there are a number of companies involved. They are so secretive with each other. We don't know. I mean, they are not sharing data. They are doing nothing. Even WHO has come out with a document saying that what are the criteria that will make CHIM ethical, but it is not able to coordinate all these players who are too powerful. Will it happen? Really problem. The volunteer would be necessarily from low risk, morbidity-free background and use non-natural mode of infection. Such CHIM may have limited generalizability because the real sufferer in this epidemic are people who are elderly, right, having a comorbidity. So how are you going to, balance these two kind of things? So it may be possible that you may find a vaccine working, but you may still require a large-scale trial. So that is a possibility that is there. So what may happen is that you may be able to telescope phase 1, phase 2 trial, but not the phase 3 trial. The degree and duration of naturally acquired and vaccine-derived immunity are currently unknown. As I was telling you, that there is an artificial environment and there is a natural environment. Will it work there? What would be the upper limit of the viral dose when you really infect people? There is no information available on this. Second type of issues are, what kind of infective agents would be used? Live, attenuated, inactivated. What is its pathophysiology? Do we have enough information there? Public engagement is very, very important. Today, emotionally, people are supporting it. But if something goes wrong, there may be a real backlash. And that may really lead to the loss of trust in science. And there may be, violence and all kind of stuff. The site where CHIM is done entails risk to the participants, to the researchers, and to the community. If it goes, the organism goes in the community. So it's another problem that how are you going to create a site which is absolutely foolproof? And consent process is there. I'm sure there will be a lot of question on it. So I'm not going to talk about, but it's very, very important to ensure that there is a high level of comprehension and in the informed consent. This is the last point. There is the issue of payment. CHIM has always used payment to the participants. And in the most of the CHIM trials, the people who have participated are vulnerable people like students and all. Okay, there are issues. Will you give money? You can say, okay, don't give money and all kind of stuff that we can discuss, right? And the issue of injury compensation, insurance, and those kind of things are there. But all these issues are not unsurmountable. It depends upon how far science develops, the information comes out, and those issues are overcome. So unless they are done, it's not possible to do this CHIM at the moment. What I find, I think what is perhaps is happening is that companies are not doing CHIM at the moment simply because there is so much of infection in the communities that they are able to test their own, vaccine easily. They know that this wave of infection will go, and there may be another wave of infection of COVID next year. In between stage, if there is no vaccine available, then they may be using CHIM. And I think the clamor for CHIM from the scientists and the companies will increase once the infection level goes down. So I think that is the time for which forest stream is being kept reserved. I just end here and wait for your question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Amar, for a detailed and very clear presentation on human challenge trials and their possible use here in COVID and the problems they have whether here or elsewhere. Veena Jori may have different views on the use of CHIM, and we want to hear from her later. But right now, she will speak from her work on access to drugs. Veena has filed a number of patent challenges to prevent drug companies from using monopoly control to charge extortionist prices. So, in that context, if Veena can talk about the fact that, okay, when we get an effective drug, Veena, tell us about the problems, specifically about the drugs which are now being used for COVID, such as remdesivir. Veena, over to you.
Thank you, Sandhya, and thank you for panelists too. Am I audible?
Yes, and we'll just be bringing your slides up in a minute.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, we're going to be looking at post-trial access. May that be for a drug which through an RCT or otherwise is proven to be effective, or of a vaccine. And should this post-trial access be available to just the individuals entering trials, or should it be available to the community? And what are the barriers is what something that we could look at. Now the first slide, please. I will just quickly run through, what are the laws currently or the guidelines currently in India and even elsewhere where that talk about post-trial access. Now in India, we have the law and we have the new drugs and clinical trials regulations that actually regulate new drugs and investigational new drugs. And what they basically say is that the trial subject, after the completion of the trial, if they feel that this drug is effective, it could be considered and it could be made available to the trial participant free of charge. It doesn't really talk about making it available to the community who is affected, or at low cost or free of charge or anything of that kind. And generally, I mean, if we look at it from COVID point of view, well, either the patient would have recovered after the trial and would not require the medicine anymore, or they would have expired and therefore they wouldn't need it. So in that sense, this really doesn't help us. But the ICMR has come out with new guidelines, which are the COVID-19 pandemic in April 22. And interestingly, they do mention at least a little bit about the community. And they say that communication in research should be, your post-trial research, you should communicate it to not only the participants, but even to the communities. And what they do write is that ethics committees should consider the need for an a priori agreement between the researcher and the sponsor regarding post-research access of community to successful interventions and benefit sharing. Now, it's nice to at least that we have mentioned it, but practically, does this really work? I mean, ethics committee can say, okay, just consider it. But do you think pharma companies would really say, yeah, okay, we are going to provide it freely to the communities? There are very rare and very few who may agree to it. So, but interestingly, the guidelines do speak about community engagement. And community, and even the WHO guidance on managing ethical issues in infectious diseases of 2016, when there is an outbreak of an infectious disease, as we are seeing, even they give the importance of community engagement in research, and that it is ethical to have community engagement while doing the research, which generally we don't see it because it's looked at a medical issue, patient has come, let's try this drug. But involving the community becomes a very important factor. Next slide, please. And why do we need to look at communities? Because they play a very important role. There are, okay, the doctors are in the forefront, but, communities are providing food essentials to people. Communities, the way the disease has affected people varies. How it has affected some and how it has affected others is different. And researchers need to understand this while doing their research. They need to bring in transparency, trust, etc. Now, and we do know that it affects the disadvantaged people disproportionately. And whether tomorrow, if there is a drug, there is a vaccine, will it be accessible to the poor and the disadvantaged? Will they have to buy it at exorbitant rates to protect themselves, or will the government provide it free of charge? And what are the factors that are preventing all of this is what we will see, and what the government can do is what we're going to look at. Next slide, please. So factors that affect access are primarily the pricing, okay? And we look at some of the prices of these drugs. We're looking at patents being the biggest barrier of these, of accessibility of most of these drugs, and especially the newer ones which are getting approval. And there being either no government policy or inadequate government policies, and we look at how the government can actually regulate prices, and they have the power to revoke patents on some of these issues. Next slide. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of just 3 of the drugs which are being used. There are lots of them. Some of them, like doxycycline or dexamethasone, these are all off patents. They are very easily available. They are pretty cheap also and can be afforded. But these drugs like remdesivir and favipiravir, which have been granted approval, emergency approval, and they are also using the MAB, which is that tocilizumab. These drugs, we are just looking at some of them. Remdesivir is being marketed by Gilead. Gilead has entered into voluntary licenses with 4 Indian companies. Hetero and Cipla have launched their medicines in India recently. And there is an interesting article that if any of you all get a chance, you should read, by Andrew Hill and others. And he has done a calculation of the cost of production of generics. So what he has looked at what is the cost of the active pharmaceutical ingredient. He has looked at what is the processing charges in it. He has looked at what is he has given them a 10% profit to the pharma company, that with a 10% profit and by paying 27% taxes, what will be their cost of producing this drug? Okay, and what he says that for a course of 10 days, the cost is only $9, okay, which is about rupees 675 for 100 milligram twice a day dosage. In India, actually, the government, the national guidelines, they speak about providing remdesivir for just 6 days, in which they say first day you have to give 2 doses, and then you have to give 1 dose for the remaining 5 days. That's the latest guideline, but that may change. Now, what is the treatment cost in India for these drugs? If we have to give it for, say, 10 days, it will come to about 32,000 rupees. Okay. Similarly, we look at favipiravir. It is being marketed. These are the brand names of the drugs. Toyoma has actually got a patent on it, but they have just recently, in 2019, they've gone off patents. But they do have some patents, which are the evergreening patents, but there are already quite a few generics in the market producing this drug. Now, according to Hill, for a 14-day period of providing this drug, it comes to about $20, which is about 1,500 rupees. Okay, but in India, we will get it at about 13,000, because favipiravir is being marketed for 103 rupees per tablet. Okay, it is not per day, which is actually the per day cost, but they are providing per tablet of 200 milligram. And the dosage on the first day, they are saying is you have to take about 1,800 milligram. So the cost is really, it's a range between 13,000 to 53,000, depending on what dosage you're giving and how many milligrams you have to give. And similarly, we'll go to tocilizumab, which Roche has got the patent on it, and they have given an exclusive license to Cipla. Now, remdesivir also Cipla is involved, and even in tocilizumab, Cipla is involved. And a single injection costs around 60,000 rupees. And they say, well, you may have to give a second dose of the MAB, and then it will come to around 1,20,000. So this is the costing that we are looking at. If these, post trial, how many people can access it? Next. So can people afford it? Is the question. So when these drugs are used in a trial, they'll obviously be provided free of charge. But some of these drugs are used in an emergency because they've been approved in that. So if they are in a government hospital, they may or may not get it free of charge, but otherwise they will have to buy the drug. And those who can afford it only will be able to buy it. What other thing is happening is that for any viral, like if you see HIV, you look at HCV, you look at even tuberculosis, they are all, the treatment regime is generally a combination. It's not just a single drug that you're providing. So when you're going to combine these drugs, and they're already thinking of combining remdesivir with other drugs, because remdesivir only attacks on the virus. I mean, it prevents the replication of the virus. But they will obviously link it with another drug. And then the cost is going to increase much more. So even if you combine remdesivir with 1 dose of tocilizumab, you're going to have to pay about ₹1 lakh for it. Okay? So the prices are not really based only on the cost of production. It also looks at the profit margins. And in a time like this, is it fair that they should look at so much? We are not even saying don't take profit. Take 10%, take 20%. But the pharmaceutical industry takes much, much more. It's the only industry that takes a lot of profit. And the government has a tool which is called the Drug Price Control Order, in which they have a list of essential medicines, which are usually for life-threatening or which are required on a daily basis, and in which they put a cap on the pricing of those drugs. But unfortunately, any drug which has been patented does not fall under the DPCO, which is the Drug Price Control Order. But they should actually, because this is a disease for which there is no cure. If you find something, it should be made available to everyone. So why can't, even if it is a patented drug, they should put a cap on it. Next slide. So patent barriers is something that we are going to look at. Patent basically creates a monopoly. It gives the right of the patent holder to decide where he wants to distribute the drug, where he wants to market it, what price he wants to give it. Okay, it prevents generic competition. But what the companies are doing, they are entering into what they call voluntary licenses with generic companies. And in India, as we see, we have a huge generic industry. And they are actually entering into these voluntary licenses with these MNCs and are producing the drugs. But what happens, first of all, these voluntary licenses they are secret. They are not in the public domain. It's obviously because it's between two private parties. What these agreements talk about, we don't know, but we do know that generally they control from where the person is going to purchase the active pharmaceutical ingredient and which is the geographical area in which the company can sell the drug. Okay, and if you see, even though their production cost is low, the prices are still pretty high, as we just saw. Okay, so what tool does the government have? The government can, in an emergency for public health reasons, in the interest of the public, they can revoke the patents so that generic companies in India or else in India can produce these drugs. They can issue compulsory licenses, and they can ask generic companies in India, okay, forget the patent, we are giving you the authority to produce this drug and make it available to everyone who needs it in this country. The government can do that. But do they really do it is what we are going to look at. Because once generics come into the market, the prices do fall down. And we'll see an example. Next slide. The important thing is that once India moved on to the patent regime of product patents, there was, interestingly, a Doha Declaration in 2001, which recognized that intellectual property actually has an effect on prices of medicines, and it has an adverse effect. And they have actually given leeway to individual countries to determine what is a medical emergency, what is extreme emergency, and that they should use the TRIPS agreement to protect public health and promote access to medicines for all. But how many of these countries are doing it is something we'll have to see. Next slide, please. And just to give you a little brief on compulsory license generally under the law can be issued to a company after 3 years of the patent have been granted. Okay, so those drugs where already 3 years are over, the government can issue a compulsory license. And in fact, the Iyengar Committee in 1970s, they recognized how patents can actually abuse a system, and they were quite against product patents, at least for pharmaceutical drugs. But compulsory license can be issued in an emergency situation. And just to give you an example, there's only one compulsory license that has been issued in the country, which is for a liver cancer and kidney cancer drug. And if you just look at it, Bayer is who was the patent holder, selling it at 2,80,000. Cipla infringed the patent and was selling it at 30. And NATCO applied to the government and said, look, you give us a compulsory license, we will produce this drug for 8,800. So you look at the price drop and look at how it affects accessibility. Okay, next. So I will just give a very brief case study of remdesivir. It's actually a very old drug because it was initially developed for Hep C, and then they tried it as a potential treatment for Ebola and for Marburg infections. And basically, it's in this broad family of viruses that they call the Filoviridae virus, which includes the Ebola, the Marburg, the Kuva, and the coronavirus. They all belong to the same viral family. And what is remdesivir? It is basically a nucleoside inhibitor that blocks the replication of the virus. Okay, so it is used mainly in moderate cases, and in solidarity trials they are testing it. In other countries, what they have found that there is a 31% improvement in recovery time. So instead of 15 days of hospitalization, it has come down to 11 days. And there is a slight difference in the mortality rates, from 7.1% versus 11.9%. Okay. Now, Gilead has the patent on it. They have been granted a patent on it in India also. And they have been actually filing patent applications since 2002. Okay, for compounds that are very similar. At the end of the day, what are they doing? They are just tweaking the compound, adding a little bit here and there, which is generally how drug development happens. Okay, so from 2004 to 8, they modified the adenine nucleobase core, and the core of the scaffold, which is really that works, has been actually discovered in 2008. From 2009, they started modifying it and they made it into prodrugs. And now prodrugs is the thing that, which is the kind of treatment. Please go to the next slide. So in India, they have received 3 patents on remdesivir. The first one is a broad Marcus claim, which covers absolutely everything under the sun. Then they have some specific claims. And in February 2020, they got a patent on the specific form of remdesivir. Okay, and now what they are going to do, and I won't be surprised if they do it, that they are going to do these combinations, because you have to combine remdesivir with some other drugs. So if they combine it into a single drug, or if they even want to provide it as treatment with separately, they will file for another patent, and for all you know, they might even get it. But Cancer Patient Aid Association actually sent a letter to the government in, I think, April, asking them to revoke the patent on remdesivir. And even Third World Network has sent a similar letter for the 3 patents. What they are basically saying is that, this drug is not a new drug. It's an old drug. Why have you given it a patent? You have not done the due diligence, and you have given it a patent. Okay. So as I said earlier, they have entered into these 4, and Cipla is selling it at around 5,000 a vial, and Hetero will be selling remdesivir for 5,400 per vial. Okay. But if you allow generics into the market, if you're going to allow, if you even issue a compulsory license, but since it's a very recently given patent, they may not be able to give a compulsory license. But if you revoke the patent, generics can enter into the market, and the vial can come down to ₹75 per vial. So you look at the difference in the costing that can happen, and accessibility, post-trial accessibility, as we say. So the government has the grounds under the law to revoke patents on grounds of emergency, on grounds of public health needs, etc. And they can also issue compulsory licenses. Next. I'm sorry, have I gone over time? So just briefly, the Cancer Patient Aid Association has asked them to revoke the patent as there is no novelty and inventive step. Okay, next slide. So this is just that in the past there have been protests by people, and we know the famous Gleevec case when Novartis had filed for a patent, and there was a lot of protests and how patents, and luckily we won in the Supreme Court. Next slide. So just to bring in a bit on how the Supreme Court, at least in the past, has upheld the right to health and to access medicines. That the Supreme Court in various cases in the past have hoisted obligation to formulate and implement effective policy on the state to ensure safe and affordable medicines to the people. In HIV, we have seen they have passed orders to ensure access to first-line and second-line treatments. They did not allow, as we saw in the Gleevec case, evergreening attempt and an appeal to grant patent wrongfully. And all of this can be applied in COVID also, but there needs to be a will to do all of this. Yeah, next slide. And this is my last concluding slide, just to wrap it up, that we need to have equitable access to communities of treatment and of vaccines. Yeah, community engagement is important. Policies of the government are required. Data sharing, data should be made available in the public domain, actually, of any of the trials that take place. We need affordable drugs, encourage generic production. The government has the power to place a cap on the prices of these medicines. And the government also has the power to revoke patents. Okay, so, and issue compulsory licenses. So the last slide, thank you very much. I thank my colleagues also for helping me.
Thanks very much, Veena, for presenting the importance of the community that should benefit from the products of research, and particularly the relevant ethical guidelines as well as the regulatory regime. I mean, particularly shocking is the fact that the prices are enabled because of the regulation favorable to industry. And I think it's important, Veena, to mention in the context of research ethics that these drugs have already recovered their costs, I presume. So that this is really just plain, whatever, usurious sort of pricing. And all of us know, I mean, I've seen, on various WhatsApp groups, people are asking for, can we get remdesivir? Anyone has it? Where can we get it from? Where can it be imported from? So there's this whole panic being generated for people to buy outrageously expensive drugs for however, good or bad they are, however effective they are. I think in these three short presentations, you guys have covered, SP, Amar, and Veena, you've packed in a huge amount of information, and you've covered major key ethical issues in COVID-19 research. And I'd like to take this forward to a discussion, posing questions that all of you may wish to comment on. But first, Padmapriya, how much time do we have for this?
So you have 20 minutes for the moderated discussion.
Okay.
And then we switch to the, we're actually already running over time.
Okay.
So I would suggest that you keep it to like 15 minutes of moderated discussion. So we at least take in 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes for questions.
Okay, so what you want to do is you want to sort of call out to me after 10, 15 minutes, so you can do that.
Yes, I'll do that.
Yeah. I guess the first question to SP is, I mean, you've described the predicament of the doctor, and as you pointed out earlier, there's a question of a doctor wearing two hats, a physician wearing two hats, of a researcher as well as a physician, and that's often the case. So I know you've discussed it in your presentation, but I want to ask you again. I mean, doctors are desperate, patients are desperate, and if you don't have proven drugs, you have drugs that just might work. Can you expect them not to try the drugs that might work? I mean, all the drugs that you're talking about right now, whether it's HCQ or all the drugs that are currently under trial, you've gone to them because there's a possibility of them working. What is a physician to do, given that the trial is going to go on for months and that person might, be suffering right now and may go in days without an effective drug? How is the physician cum researcher supposed to deal with this? SP, you got to talk.
Yeah. So I agree. I agree, Sandhya, that there are desperate times. There are very testing and trying times. But I strongly believe that even during these desperate times, we should not abandon our scientific reason and logical thinking. In fact, this is a time when we need science more, not less. And there is no point in prescribing our patients drugs which have been untested, which are unproven, which are off-label, which have never been shown to prove their benefit. So this disease is concerned. If you go back in the history, let me give a simple example that way back in 1987, the New England Journal of Medicine published a big trial called CAST trial, cardiac arrhythmia suppression trial. That was a time when cardiologists all over the world thought that a drug called flecainide, a class 1C antiarrhythmic drug, which was capable of abnormal cardiac rhythm, was a wonderful drug. And it was probably prescribed to almost every patient who got heart attack. So this was a popular view. This was based on theory. This was based on physiology. This was based on popular perception. This was based on the guidelines which were issued by cardiologists. But the drug was tested in the real world, in a real randomized control trial. Investigators, to their horror, found that more patients were dying in flecainide arm compared to the control group. The trial was stopped halfway through because of ethical reasons, and now was completely taken off from the prescription of cardiologists. So, to believe that certain drugs are probably working. Let me give an example of hydroxychloroquine. But the drugs which work beautifully on petri dishes or which work beautifully on paper, when they are translated to the rigors of a scientific trial, they fell flat. What happened to hydroxychloroquine? When it was tested in both solidarity and recovery trial, which are very adequately powered, well, there were no mortality diseases. In fact, there were some side effects and some abnormal cardiac events as well. So my point is that based purely on our perception, based purely on anecdotal evidence, based purely very desperate times, there is no point in testing untested and unproven drugs, getting emotional with these drugs, and trying to catch almost every straw that comes our way. This is absolutely anti-science here. So we the physicians have got both a moral as well as an ethical obligations to ensure that whatever we do, the prescriptions that we write, the treatments that we deliver, the care that we give to our patients is guided based on scientific principles and not by our own personal likings and dislikings.
Thank you. Would Amar or Veena have anything to add to that?
Well, this is a common issue about wearing two hats. That is called conflict of interest, where when I am a physician of a patient and I also become researcher, then where is my loyalty? Whose best interest I'm going to keep? No, the best interest of research that I'm doing, or the best interest of the patient whom I'm treating. Now, the thing comes up simply because when you have a clinical trial, the entire method of treating a person gets protocolized. And so you are not having enough flexibility to take certain actions that you may feel may be required. So one of the way of doing it is to separate out researcher and the treating physician. And in many clinical trials, that may be one of the most important way of going, simply because keeping them together may create problems. So I think it's very important to avoid that conflict of interest as far as possible. Yeah.
Thanks, Amar. Veena, would you like to say something? Veena? Nothing? Okay, my next question.
Nothing really, because Amar has covered this part of therapeutic misconception. Only thing what they do now is that they ask the consent to be taken by someone who is not involved in the treatment of the patient, and then so that they can minimize that therapeutic misconception. But I don't know what else can be done when the physician and the researcher are wearing two hats.
Okay, then another question, which is also directed to all of you, which is, and the fact, I mean, okay, the Indian registry shows there are a number of trials being done for Ayurveda and other interventions not to do with Western medicine. So my question here is, to truly test Ayurveda on Ayurvedic medication, the standards and the process is different from what I understand. I mean, please correct me on that. So the standard and process is different for testing an Ayurvedic drug. You're basically asked for an RCT to be used for testing your allopathic drugs. Should the same be applicable to Ayurvedic drugs? And if so, how could it be while respecting or maintaining the system of medicine? So, I mean, I'd like to hear from all of you, if possible.
You want me to start?
Because SP has...
SP is the clinician. I am not a clinician.
So let's ask SP first, what he says because he has been talking about the randomized clinical trial, and I want to hear about Veena, because Veena is looking also at regulation and as a member of the ethics committee. You have to unmute.
You have to unmute.
Unmute.
So my point is science is science. So whether the intervention is coming from modern science or is coming from alternative or complementary medicine or from Ayurveda, it doesn't matter, isn't it? So all that I want to know, that all things being equal, is intervention A better than intervention B? And these results are based on a proper randomization. Now, whether the trial is based on an Ayurvedic medicine or a modern medicine, the rules of the game are the same. That all that you need to do is randomize people in 2 arms, make sure that there are no biases, follow them up, count the events, and show that, well, all things being equal, drug A was better than drug B, or drug A had fewer side effects compared to drug C. Otherwise, what would happen is that you would inject your own biases. You would make these 2 groups very dissimilar. And by making these 2 groups very dissimilar, you would also add certain other prognostic factors which could distort the association between the trial drug and the outcome event. To make sure that our conclusions are not distorted by these biases, by these confounder variables, by producing an artificial inequality between these 2 groups, by ensuring that there is a proper blinding and masking, we are making these scientific studies absolutely robust and trustworthy. Otherwise, at the end of the day, I would have no way to know whether the drug really worked or not. And I would not be able to apply that drug for the care of my individual patients.
Unmute, Sandhya. Unmute.
So my question is this: they work on a different system, so their understanding of how efficacy is different. So given that it's different, how does one use an RCT here? That's my question. So Amar and then Veena. I mean, I wonder if you can make very short interventions so we get to cover these points in the few minutes that we have.
Let me just quickly cover it. I was when this thing happened, I started reading something, and then I realized that Ayurveda is not a very monolithic discipline. There are different type of people involved in Ayurveda, and if you go on the Ayush website, you will find that there is a whole section of Ayurveda which is a formal Ayurveda, who have studied in medical colleges of Ayurveda and all, and who have come out and who have also picked up some part of the modern medicine methods in what they're talking about. And as a consequence, you will find that Ayurveda has also developed its own standards for doing RCTs. And you'll find that on Ayush website all the time. You have a good clinical practice guideline. You will have various methods of having a high quality to be kept and all those things have come up there. And so a section of Ayurvedic practitioners are not averse to Ayurveda. Otherwise, Ramdev, that whole Patanjali debate that came about, he would not have gone for the RCT. He went for the RCT. Now, you may say that RCT was a fraud or not. It is a different debate. But they knew that this sells. RCT idea sells in the market while the other thing don't. The last thing that I want to say is that there is a major issue is, and I'm sure many people who are listening to it might raise it, is that what is the composition of Ayurveda remedies? What kind of chemicals, what kind of things which are there? What are the active ingredients which are actually working? Well, Ayurveda that was considered to be a major issue once upon a time. When I used to sit on the ethics committee 10 years back, the first question we'll ask is that, well, you have brought the new medicine, you say it might work and we want to test it out. But then tell me, what is the chemical composition? Have you done all the laboratory testing as we do for the allopathic medicine, which is not possible, which has it is more of holistic, it is a full compound rather than active ingredients which are taken into account. And the last thing in that is that, is there a way of producing it in the same quality that is a good manufacturing practice, as we talk about in drug manufacture? That is it possible to have the same quality to come out? And I think Ayurvedic industry has what some of the sociologists have said, has tried to do doubling. They try to play the role like allopathy, and they have also created their own good manufacturing practice, and so they are claiming that they can do it. So yes, they may do RCTs, but RCT should be of the standard as Dr. SP is talking about. And if that happens, there shouldn't be any problem. I don't think there should be any discrimination among the different kind of systems, provided everybody is agreeing to some kind of basic scientific standards.
Thanks. Veena?
Yeah, so what my understanding is that the Ayurvedic medicines are medicines that are already there and have been known in the scriptures, and they use that for treatment. And what they are used for is also pretty much known. They are mainly immunoboosters that they use. And we've seen it in HIV, we've seen it in COVID, that they are given a license to use these medicines for a certain condition. And it's generally immunoboosting that they are used for. But what happens is, the moment the practitioner sees, oh, it's helping the patient, they are getting better, they start claiming it to be a cure. And the moment in a situation where there is a virus that doesn't have a cure, and you show this hope that, oh, we have found this Ayurvedic medicine, which is a cure, you're going to have people rushing to buy it. We've seen it. We've seen it in HIV. People have sold their homes, they have sold their gold, they have sold everything to get a medicine for that cure, so that they become better and they are cured of a disease for which there is none. So we have to wait very carefully of how these medicines are claiming to be cures, when actually they are not cures. They are only boosters. They are known what the effects are, etc. All that they can do is they will do an RCT to see whether it is helpful or not. To claim it as a cure would be wrong. And we also have another act, which is called the Drugs and Magic Remedies Act, which actually prevents people from claiming cures for certain diseases. COVID is a fairly new disease. I don't know if the government has, included it in their list of diseases. They have, yes, but you cannot claim a cure for it then. So, and generally the practitioners will work on that level, So being helpful is good, but claiming it as a cure is another, is what we have to be careful about. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Veena. Padmapriya, do we have 2 more questions possible?
No, I think we should just move on to the question and answers. We're running out of time, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Should I bring up the first few questions then and comments?
I thought if Amar Jesani from Karachi is online,
yes,
we go hear from him.
Sure.
Okay. Amir, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a comment to make? We have about 2 minutes. We'd like to hear something from Karachi.
We can't hear you, Dr. Amir.
Can you hear us now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And see me or not see me?
Yeah, we can sort of see you.
Okay,
Yes.
excellent. So thank you very much. These are very, very interesting talks. Now, coming from our part of the world, our side of the fence, one thing that we've noticed is that our research agent, let me take this off. our research agenda has actually been determined quite a lot by public opinion, which has been formed very, very, very rapidly by our TV anchors who have all become epidemiologists and ID specialists and virologists very rapidly. I don't know whether that has happened or not over there. We see the example, for instance, of these drugs that you mentioned. So remdesivir suddenly became the drug of choice and disappeared and went into black market. We've seen this now with Dexa, which was practically available everywhere for very little. Now it has disappeared. And the other thing that is happening is steroids are indicated for a certain subset of patients whom they seem to help a lot, which is fantastic. They are being demanded because of media hype by the people who just turned positive and are completely okay at home, but they want a shot of steroid. What has happened, a similar thing has happened to a much more concerning level, is with the plasma. The convalescent plasma started off as a Muri trial in Pakistan because it wasn't fitting into the randomized control setup that we thought it would, but it was a very rapid, and people jumped into it, and it was picked up by the media, and of course the media picked up on the researchers, and this became a major hype to the point that it has dictated public policy. They now want every hospital around the corner to be transfusing patients who just turned positive, or anybody, or who's in the cytokine storm, so entire spectrum with plasma, and it is now being sold. So their hospitals are getting calls, and I want to sell my plasma for like 5,000 or 500,000 rupees. So this is actually happening. It has become a commercial market. And this has happened because of a very strong media. Now, over 100 channels, they have to say something, and this is how they're doing it. This has led to irresponsible behavior from the researchers who are actually enjoying limelight also. This has also led to, in many instances, irresponsible behavior by regulators or people in a position of authority who should have actually countered this and are not doing so, and are buying into it. So it was a point when they said that within 3 months, a Chinese vaccine will be available for people across the country. And this is a statement being made by senior people, which they of course had to retract later on. So how far, I don't know how far the tail is wagging the dog in India, because here it is certainly we are being backed completely by the media. That was my intervention. Thank you.
Thanks, Amit. I think Kajal Bharadwaj, thank you very much, Amit, for the perspective from Karachi. I think Kajal Bharadwaj, a lawyer who's been working with Veena, also on patent opposition and related issues and access to drugs. I'd like to hear from Kajal.
Gosh. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry. I think Veena actually did a fantastic job of covering all the issues. There's maybe a couple of things that I would just like to highlight. You know, the company, she spoke about this drug remdesivir. And I think it's like actually quite a fascinating case study to also look at, you know, this tail wagging the dog and things like that. I think has also happened with remdesivir. In the last couple of days, you've seen huge media hype on the drug. And not really any in-depth understanding of when it would be useful, who it would be useful for, the fact that 6% of patients had severe adverse reactions to it. You know, these are things that are not being discussed because of the media hype. But what I really wanted to highlight was that the company that is involved in this, Gilead, is very well known to those of us who have worked on HIV and hepatitis C. This is a calculating company that has positioned its drug to become the standard of care. So unfortunately, we are going to be stuck with this drug because all future combinations are going to come with it. And they are employing the typical tactics that they have used with HIV and hepatitis C. A handful of generic producers. This time it's secret licensing. Earlier, we know from their licenses that they like to control API. We know there's a huge shortage in the United States of the drug now. And I suspect the Indian companies would be asked to supply. We have no idea what's going to happen on that front. If it is promising, why aren't more companies producing it? You know, Veena didn't mention this, but the Bangladeshi companies were first out of the gate actually to produce this drug. And the first commitment they have made is that they will provide it free of cost to the government. We are now stuck with prices that are 70 times or 80 times the cost of production. So I think the one thing we should really look at when we're discussing these larger issues is to look closely at the actors involved. We know their script. We know what they do. We know how they control commercial arrangements. We know how they control prices. And we know that the government in the past has been scared off by the United States from taking action. And I think those things must dictate how we work on this, rather than just saying, oh, the prices are too high, but actually concentrate action on what to do with this. Gilead is also known, for instance, for taking certain versions of drugs and then waiting a while for coming up with better versions. So now they are looking at an inhalable version so that you don't have to be hospitalized to take it. Eventually, there will be an oral version. Each of these things will be patented and they will be pushed to us. For those animal lovers out there, just a small interesting nugget of information. The parent nucleoside of remdesivir has been used by cat owners in the black market for a long time to actually treat a respiratory illness in cats. And many scientists are now wondering why it's a simplified form. And in fact, when remdesivir enters your body and in the lungs, it turns into the parent nucleoside. So they're wondering why have they complicated life with remdesivir when they had a simpler version to work with. So, we know that these games go on, and I think it's very important to keep an eye on that. And it's equally important for our regulator and for ICMR to push out proper scientific evidence-based information on what remdesivir can do and cannot do. For instance, they found that getting it within 10 days of symptom onset had a better outcome, right? The adverse events is something that doctors need to keep track of. So just wanted to sort of make those points. But this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for it.
Thanks so much, Kajal. Padmasya, you take over and
Sure.
the questions from
Yes. So I'll basically read out the questions, and between all the three speakers, any one of you can, or all of you can choose to answer. There's one specific question to Dr. SP from Amar Jesani. Within disaster situations, sometimes it may be unethical to conduct randomized control trials because of the urgency of the mortality situations. One of the options is a Muri trial. Can you please comment on that? This is coming from Karachi.
Well, I agree that if we take a leaf from Ebola epidemic 2014, the mortality was extremely high. For example, in pregnant women and neonates, the mortality was of the order of 80 and 90%. And that was a time when it was extremely difficult to do these clinical trials for several reasons, which Amar has explained beautifully in his presentation. But my point is that today COVID-19 is very different from Ebola. The mortality in COVID-19, all the countries around 3 or 4%, that there are some modern drugs available and there are good resources available, good hospitals available, good monitoring systems available in the country, where doing a clinical trials in India is right now not a problem. So it's only a question of asking the right questions, making sure that right kind of participants are enrolled, they're properly given proper interventions, we follow them up and count the events. So the situation is not as desperate, I would say, so far as COVID-19 is concerned, as it was for Ebola in 2014 in those African countries was there.
Thank you.
May I make a point?
Sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to add one aspect of it, is that all these drugs that we are talking about for COVID, none has been given a full marketing authorization. All of them are given authorization as an emergency use. I think that also was a concept that came up during Ebola, where they said that when you are having a clinical trial going on, you can provide the drug to the other people. I think that is. I would like to suggest to Veena and other people who are from the law that how do we tighten this whole aspect of emergency use? What is the meaning of it? Can an emergency use drug, which is to be used outside the clinical trial only for compassionate reason, because there is nothing else is available, can that drug be advertised? Can that drug be priced the way they are doing it now? Because all these drugs are being priced when they are actually not given open market authorization to do it. So can't we make a demand that the same drug, remdesivir, when it is in clinical trial, it is given to everybody free of charge. And when the clinical trial is going on and we are giving it outside clinical trial, the same drug, you charge 50,000 rupees or something like that. How is it possible? And I think that is where we need to also have some advocacy to bring it under control. There are guidelines of WHO as well as ICMR about how to use this, how to do emergency use. And those guidelines are being flouted by the ICMR itself. They did it in hydroxychloroquine, and they are doing it for the other. They are not opening their mouth. There is an ethics committee for COVID, which is not issuing any statement about this kind of emergency use of the drug when ICMR is own guideline about how it should be done.
May I intervene now, or Veena would like to speak? I just want to quickly say that the speaker from Karachi, Dr. Amar Jesani, is one of the key people running the Center for Biomedical Ethics, which is a major institution in South Asia discussing and teaching ethics, biomedical ethics. We have to, it's one person, but it's a huge organization. You may notice that about 10 people sitting around the table, they're all attending this meeting because they all want to participate. Say that. Veena, you have something to say, I assume.
No, I completely agree with Amar on this, because you are bringing in these drugs without they going through a complete trial. You don't know how it is affecting, as even Kajal pointed it out, and you are giving it approval. So when you're giving it emergency approval, you have basically given it a waiver for phase 3 trials in India. And when you're giving it a waiver for phase 3 trials, then what they should do is then monitor it properly and provide it either freely or at very, very low cost. Maybe just your cost of production, if you're doing it in a private place or whatever. But in the government setup, it has to be provided freely. And we should make the demands, as Amar was saying. But I think we are running a little short of time, so I won't go on. Okay?
Yeah. Sorry. One of the questions that's come in, and this is from Menaka Rao, she's a journalist, and she asks, I want to understand ethical dilemmas when dealing with a life-threatening disease, say such as HIV in the 90s or bedaquiline in recent times. She basically wants to ask, how does one wade through such dilemmas when it comes to life-threatening diseases, in case of, say, placebo and standard of care?
So the SP taking or you want me?
Yeah, Amar, you can take. Okay, so these dilemmas are perennial. So this is not peculiar to the infectious disease, but these dilemmas are something which the physicians face when it comes to, say, acute heart attacks, strokes, cancers, pregnancy, hemorrhagic shocks, accidents, trauma, etc., etc. But the point is again here is that, well, they're really speaking, they're extremely trying circumstances so far as a physician is concerned. But again, as I said, that if you start trying untested and unproven drugs based on, say, anecdotal evidence, based on your own perceptions, based on your own biases, you end up doing more harm than good so far as these patients are concerned. And then there is another problem. Now, this becomes a standard of practice because it has been going on for several years. And this standard of practice now and all those adverse events which occur because of an irrational use of these drugs, those adverse events are accepted as collateral damage. And this, over the years, this standard practice, all these drugs now not only become a part of a standard practice, but they are accepted universally at a time when the crisis is there. So we badly skew those risk-benefit ratio. We get those untested drugs into our clinical armamentarium, and these drugs not only survive, but they start thriving. So in a way, then, irrational use of drugs based purely on our own perceptions.
I think just add a couple of points. I think critically ill people and desperate people are considered to be vulnerable people because they will be ready to undergo anything, and that is a very well-known condition in research. You have to differentiate between two types of trial. One is that a doctor who is in charge of the patient, a physician who is treating the patient, in the desperate situation decides to use something which is off-label, which he or she believes that may be able to help the patient in this critical time, which happens and which has been happening for very, very long time. And that is a right between the patient and the doctor that is provided by the law. So the off-label use is the not unknown quantity. It does happen. But on the other hand, when you are actually going beyond it, in the sense of your drug regulator, your government, your international health institution, or the health ministry, creating that drug as a standard of care in the emergency situation is very, very different from off-label use. What you are then saying is that everybody should be using it. That's what happened to hydroxychloroquine, and it is happening to all these new drugs that have come. And that is where more precaution is required, and that's how the Mayuric guidelines came. That came in 2014 during Ebola, that monitored emergency use of unregistered therapies is the concept that came up, which is also akin to compassionate use, but the compassionate use can sometimes be very haphazard, without monitoring and without creating documentation. Here they believe that anything that you do of this kind, when the government is proposing it, then it must be done in a monitored way. A scientific committee and ethics committee must monitor what is happening to those patients. They must ensure that the good range of data are created, which could be used along with the RCT data for the final decision about whether the drug is really effective or not. And at the same time, it also provides a lot of protection to the patients who are being given this drug in this manner. So the desperate patients are more open to experimentation, and that's how they require more safeguards when they are brought into the use in the clinical trial, as well as in the use of the emergency drugs as they have come up now.
We are actually getting a lot of questions, but I'll only be able to take 2 more. So I'm really sorry for the others for putting their questions, but I'll try to figure a way to get all the questions answered by the speakers. And when we put out the recorded version, we'll make sure that those questions are also answers also available. We have a comment and a question from Anurag Bhargava. He says, the dilemma that you talked about, SP, the dilemma that you talked about is real. We're also supposed to deliver patient-centric care. This involves taking into account patient preferences and expectations. How would you respond to a patient's request for HCQ to be given to him in spite of the evidence? And it is not expensive and probably not harmful. So the question is, how would you respond to a patient's request for HCQ?
Well, Anurag knows David Sackett very well, but David Sackett in 1996 defined evidence-based medicine, and I quote David Sackett, that it's a beautiful blend of judicious use of current best evidence, you combine with your own expertise, and you also add patients' values and concerns in that. So it's not pure science, it's not pure your own experience or judgment, but patients' values and perceptions are also incorporated in a decision making. My only point is that when the patients get desperate and they start asking their doctors to try almost everything, then it is a moral duty and ethical obligation for the doctors to explain to them that what is in their best interest. Otherwise, this is something that we see regularly in cancer victims, because when they are in a terminally in the terminal stage, they ask for almost everything, and only and if you start complying with their every wish, every measure that they are suggesting, then it would become extremely difficult for physicians to practice a scientific medicine. So the idea is, get science, get your own experience, get their values also, blend them together, communicate them well, isn't it, and make sure that everybody is on the same board. Thank you.
Another question that we have from Maitri Porecha of the Hindu Business Line. She asks, just as we speak, dexamethasone has been allowed as an alternate to methylprednisolone for COVID clinical management. Please let me know your expert thoughts on this. Is it too early or timely for DEXA to be replaced?
Okay, the 2 great trials from England have definitely shown that dexamethasone works wonders so far as moderately ill or severely ill patients with life-threatening illnesses. It has been shown to cut down the death rates by 1/3 in patients with life-threatening illness, 1/5 those who are on oxygen. but it has not been shown to decrease mortality in those who are only mildly ill there, isn't it? So the point is that the dexamethasone is a very cheap drug. It's very inexpensive drug. Indians have got huge experience with dexamethasone for last several decades. My only point is that because the dexamethasone has become so popular, there is a huge risk of this drug being used right, left, center in every fever and cough now. So this irrational practice would permeate down from big cities to the smaller towns to the villages. And now probably every patient now stands a risk of getting a shot of dexamethasone in his arm the moment he starts coughing or the moment he has a fever, because everybody would think that, well, this is a magic bullet. And thanks to the huge publicity that this drug got from media, television channels, WhatsApp universities, and so on, now there's a huge risk of this irrational medicine being promoted in India.
Right. A question from
just a small point.
Yeah,
I think we need to keep clarifying that dexamethasone is not the antiviral drug like antibiotic. It is a drug which is for the clinical management of the patient. And because people sometimes mistake it, saying that, well, it is like a new antibiotic against this virus. It is not like that. I think that we need to say. And then another thing is that mild and moderate cases, if you start dexamethasone very early, it could cause more harm than providing it. So it has to be for the acute cases who are in emergency care. So I think that is that we should keep saying, otherwise it is going to be misused, as he has said.
right. And actually, Malini Isola, who's here, she just said that the Ministry of Health has released today new clinical management protocols for COVID, and dexamethasone has been allowed as an alternative to the methylprednisolone in this revision. So just a quick update that's been from here.
I think that should be fine.
Yeah. Just a question. I think Dr. Datta wants to know if anything about Coronil was ethical at all, and how does the Coronil from Patanjali fits into the whole aspect of emergency use. So yeah, just who wants to take that?
Amar.
I think what needs to be done is, because there is a lot of questions being asked about the way trial was done. The regulator does not know what kind of trial was carried out, and I think that's how the regulator has stopped it. Regulator here is Ayush Ministry. There is if you go through the records, you will find that sometime last year, Ayush was supposed to appoint a drug controller general for Ayush medicine experimentation. As I was saying, that there is a lot of doubling that is happening, in the sense that Ayurveda is trying to follow the same kind of research methodology as allopathy. And so Ayush Ministry was going to have its own drug controller like DCGI, and for the Ayush. Now, I think they all were kept in dark about the way this trial was carried out, and that's how they have stopped him. But I think there should be full investigation where it was done, because the institution where it was carried out does not seem to have a very good profile in medical care or a research output. But it is doing large number of clinical trials, which are done for the different companies. So I think that way it is involved. It seems to be a big institution, and the PI was an allopathic doctor, and so again you have a lot of information that to cull out and to understand that how the entire trial was carried out. And I think drug regulator has, if Ayush drug regulator is there, has a power to go and investigate the entire stuff. And if it turns out that it is really effective, then it should be done on the larger sample size to prove that it actually works. And if it works, well, who is saying no? Because at the moment we need anything that works, and so that has to be proven. And if it is proven, then there is no problem. Otherwise, it may turn out to be, the same kind of fraud that we had seen in the hydroxychloroquine paper, where Sarji Sphere came out with data which they are not able to validate. I think in the same way the data needs to be validated here, so that we know where we stand.
One final question before we wrap up the webinar. We have a question from Banjot Kaur, who is a journalist with Down to Earth. She asks, given the uncertainties and doubts we have around trials, how do you assess the response of the two important government bodies in India, DGCI and ICMR? So yeah, how more proactive should they have been with regards to transparency? Yeah, so whichever speaker wants to take this.
This is Veena's domain, yeah. Well, my opinion is very simple, Veena, and you can add into is that both of them have not been transparent. What I wonder all the time is that when we began, it was most of the time it was ICMR which was talking, and some kind of task force of the ICMR which was taking all the decisions, when a lot of decisions should have come from the DCGI. Even testing, different testing kits, they are to be tested by the DCGI, and the ICMR can be outsourced by the DCGI. But how can the decision maker be the ICMR, which has no power there? So it seems something crazy was happening. You know, you'll find that a large number of IAS officers sitting and taking decisions on epidemiology, while the epidemiologists are completely sidelined. So there is a chaos there at the highest level, and these two institutions were part of that chaos. That is what I can say.
Veena, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely. And also, you know, how approvals are being granted. Are they doing the due diligence or not? Especially the DCGI, are they looking at the trial data from other countries and then providing their guidance or their approval or emergency approval? We do not know. Until they don't make all this open in the public, or they don't bring in transparency, you know, it is a problematic method of functioning. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sandhya, would you want to say anything?
I really can't add. I think it's been fantastic. And I can see 100 questions in my own head.
Yeah.
And it's a discussion that really needs to be taken forward somehow.
Yes.
I don't see this. I haven't seen these discussions so far. So I hope something further will come out of it. The eminent speakers will have to comment on that later on.
So thank you everyone for joining in, and thanks a lot for the speakers and for Sandhya for doing this, helping us put together this wonderful and very timely webinar. Thank you.